Hello, esteemed colleagues. Welcome to UNIDIR Middle East Weapon of Mass Destruction Program event on artificial intelligence, threat perception, regional security, and the Middle East Weapon of Mass Destruction Free Zone. I'm Chen Zak Kane, the Middle East Weapon of Mass Destruction project head. I am delighted to see here both old and new friends and colleagues joining us today. So welcome. The project of overarching objective is to promote weapon of mass destruction non-proliferation, arms control and disarmament norms and objective in the Middle East by supporting the Middle East Weapon of Mass Destruction Free Zone initiative and other regional security-related processes through policy-relevant research, capacity building, and dialogue. I also want to acknowledge the challenging times and ongoing suffering in the region, which many of you reside in and experience daily. We understand and acknowledge the severity of the situation, and we hope that this project can contribute even in modest ways to building bridges and fostering a safer and more peaceful Middle East. We're working on several research projects, paper, and activities to account for these developments. But however, this paper is a little bit different and it concentrates on the technological dimensions, while we also acknowledge that there is no real separation between the region politics, security, and technology. The idea of this paper has been in the making for several years, and within the broader global developments, it's clear that emerging and disruptive technologies have been playing an increasing central part, but I'm delighted that Nasser agreed to take on the challenge of asking the hard question of not only what are the regional implications for these developments, but also specifically on weapon of mass destruction acquisition, as well as non-proliferation, arms control, and disarmament efforts. The paper seeks to explore the potential impact of AI on regional security in terms of regional threat perceptions, weapon of mass destruction, proliferation-related risks, and by extension, the Middle East Weapon of Mass Destruction Free Zone initiative. If you didn't have a chance to read the paper, it is available on the UNIDIR website and will be also provide the link to it in the chat. Many of our audience fall into one or two baskets, either experts on Middle East, non-proliferation, or technology, and very few are sitting in the middle of this Venn diagram. And one of the objectives behind the paper is to create a space for interaction and dialogue and build expertise to fill this void in the middle. With that, I would like to introduce our speaker and paper author, Nasser bin Nasser. Nasser is a senior advisor to our project and the founder of Ambit Advisory, a non-governmental organization focused on security and development issues in the Middle East, and the founder of InfoSynth, a global geopolitical strategic advisory firm. Previously, Nasser headed the Middle East Scientific Institute for Security, MISIS, and worked in the office of His Majesty King Abdullah II of Jordan. He received his master's degree from Princeton University. And with that, I have the pleasure to pass the floor to you, Nasser.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to all the participants, wherever you may be calling from. Thank you for joining us today. If you bear with me while I bring up the presentation. Just to get things started, maybe I'll also repeat the report objectives that were outlined by Chen very briefly. It aims to create a better understanding of AI's role and impact on threat perceptions in the region, regional security more broadly, WMD risks, and the WMD-Free Zone initiative and the future role it could play. The hope is that it can contribute to awareness-raising efforts among regional policy and expert communities, and that it could spur national and regional discussions about AI's risks, possible mitigation efforts, and opportunities. And before we get into that, just a few disclaimers. To begin with, I'd also like to echo Chen's remarks in saying that the report comes at a time of immense human suffering in our region, and we don't want to appear insensitive or to that, or that we're completely detached from that current reality. We won't be talking about any of this, of course, because it's not the subject of our report, but it's on our mind as it is, I'm sure, on the minds of everyone on this call, especially those from the region. Second, I think when we speak about the impact of AI on our region, a lot has to do with the trajectory of the technology itself, what it can do, what it can't do, as well as the military applications and its availability. At the same time, the paper, was written with a certain amount of technological determinism, But in contrast, it will also be the role of institutions, actors, finances, and politics that will be equally crucial in shaping AI's impact on regional security. Also, I've been trying to sidestep any moral determination about whether AI is good or bad. The discussion about technology's impact on society and humanity isn't new, and techno-optimists and techno-pessimists alike can convincingly argue their positions about that. I'll leave it for you to decide. I'll also mention that I've been trying to be less technical in this area to make it more accessible to a broader audience. I'm by no means an AI expert, but I'm sure there are some people on this call who are. Also, just regarding AI and its relation or lack thereof to the zone, I just want to emphasize that AI is not part of the zone mandate, but it is related and could have an impact. And our report or the discussion in no way seeks to distract, detract, or bypass the zone initiative, which remains, I think, in my personal view, the foundational block of regional security. And on the issue of timeline and pacing, technological developments are not only outpacing the capacity of people and organizations to understand and regulate AI, but they're also outpacing the review and publication timeline of reports like mine, which typically go through a lengthy review process if you're familiar with the UN process. So even as I write and wrote the report, some parts become outdated or even overtaken by events. So what is the departure point for this discussion about AI and its regional impact? I'd say it's one of the most overanalyzed yet least understood when it comes to its impact on global and regional security. There's been little to no assessment that I know of regarding its impact on regional security specifically. Regional states may be forced to develop more concrete positions about this as the military applications of these technologies become more visible and widespread, and as the impact becomes more pronounced. I had to maybe also make a narrowed focus on AI's intersectionality with non-conventional systems, i.e. WMD systems, and conventional ones that are related to WMDs, such as ballistic missiles that could carry a WMD payload. But there are other areas where AI could have an equally important impact on regional security. This includes disinformation, misinformation, digital forgeries, things of that sort, which aren't covered in my report, or the typically non-military domains such as the intelligence and environments fields, or the economic and societal ones as well. So what's the global context in which we have this discussion and write this report? It's clear to everyone that we're in this new age of geostrategic competition where we have a decline in multilateralism, decline in cooperation, restraints, and norms on WMD, particularly nuclear. I outline a few of them in the report. We have this geostrategic competition is deepened by technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. That's the term coined by the World Economic Forum, but especially on AI and its intersection with WMD, cyber, advanced weaponry, and across operational capabilities, such as targeting, command and control, early warning systems, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And a central expression of that competition has been a technological one. And it's unclear, to me at least, whether these technologies have been a driver or an outcome of this increased geostrategic competition. What is clear, however, is that it's leading to greater uncertainty and complexity. And why is AI so unique in terms of its contribution to complexity and uncertainty? First, it's that it can contribute to the development of new kinds of weapons, especially biological ones. Here, I have to clarify that it's not AI that is developing new kinds of weapons, but it can contribute to the development of new kinds of weapons. Secondly, there's the potential for increased autonomy of WMD systems would create unknown risks, to put it fairly. While governments will always claim that human control over systems is maintained from a doctrinal perspective, the speed with which automated decisions could take place makes AI-enabled systems the best and fastest means to counter AI attacks, at least in principle. Accordingly, countries may be tempted to make parts of their weapon systems more autonomous, with potentially destabilizing impacts. Also, the increased autonomy of conventional systems also adds to this complexity and uncertainty, because it can lower the threshold for countries to use force. Conflict is typically a costly undertaking, whether it's financially, politically, or ethically. And the increased autonomy and availability of autonomous systems and the lower cost for their acquisition compared to, say, a decade ago, could lower the threshold for states to use force. There's also the increased risk of misinterpretation, accidents, and escalatory action. It complicates the characterization and attribution of attacks. AI is also private sector led, as you are all well aware, which makes it more challenging for governments to regulate on a national level. It's inherently dual use and a general purpose technology, and some have claimed that the closest historical analogy to the current moment with AI is the militarization of industrial age technology. It's also widespread geographically. The technology is not limited to a few states, as was the case with nuclear weapons, say in the 1960s, when the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was negotiated, when there were only 5 states that possessed them, but they're spread geographically further. And finally, this AI is contributing to this zero-sum game dynamic, where countries appear to believe that they might lose out if they don't develop such capabilities, as there are very few alternatives that could lead to a similar or competitive advantage. And this perception, as I said, increases this zero-sum game dynamic. So in terms of the regional context, briefly, there are instances where countries in the region are believed to have used AI in military context or in military operations. There are instances where countries have incorporated AI in military systems, or there have been instances where countries have publicly declared their intention to incorporate AI into their military systems. I've outlined these in the paper. If you read the paper, I don't think there's a need to go through them now. In general, the bottom line is that there's been little to no public or official reaction to these instances, but that doesn't mean that they're not a concern to the region or regional officials. In terms of what the impact of all of this is, I have 2 ideas, broadly speaking. One is that it leads to an evolving regional sort of threat perception, fuels insecurity in an arms race, and creates further regional imbalances. As we know, the region has had a long history of conventional and non-conventional arms races, with states attempting to gain advantage over one another, whether rivals or enemies, or to just simply avoid falling behind. This has often led to destabilizing and excessive arms buildups, and I believe we might see something similar in the case of the race to develop AI capabilities. Similar to previous conventional and WMD arms races, it will be potentially fueled from outside actors, given that the region is a major market for arms. but also for more mature industrial countries, there could be some local development. There are two major differences from previous arms races in that potentially there are lower barriers, including technical, industrial, and financial, to developing military applications of AI domestically compared to most non-conventional and even some conventional systems. For example, a country would arguably require a more mature industrial base to develop a nuclear warhead, or a mature industrial defense base to develop a nuclear warhead or an advanced ballistic missile, than it would require to develop an AI-enabled drone, for example. So this would effectively enable some states to take a quantum leap in the digital age, so to speak, when it came to develop new capabilities. Secondly, as it currently stands, there are fewer restrictions on what could be potentially transferred to the region from outside the region. Given the absence of agreement among great powers on restrictions on developing military applications for AI, there are fewer restrictions on what could be transferred to the region. In the case, again, bringing up WMDs, international treaties and arms control regimes have largely prohibited the international transfer of material and related know-how. But this isn't the case with AI, as there's no agreement among states to limit or regulate AI, let alone the transfer to other states. And also, as has been argued extensively, there's no international body or organization tasked with the spread and adoption of AI military-related technologies in the way that the IAEA regulates nuclear technology. And what this also could impact, how this could also impact the region, is that a lot of studies have claimed that half of all arms races result in conflict of wars. And that's not to say that an AI arms race in the Middle East will eventually lead to conflict, but rather it's to suggest that the desire of states to achieve advantage over others or maintain parity with them will increase the risk of conflict, or at least fuel further insecurity in the region. An AI arms race may also lead to further imbalances, leading some between states that possess and those that don't possess such capabilities, and leading those that don't possess such capabilities to resort to strategies of asymmetrical warfare that depend on non-state actors and or cyber attacks combined. In terms of also looking at the regional impact, I would say that a major unknown is how this will all impact or augment conventional systems such as ballistic missiles, but also advanced weaponry such as hypersonic missiles. It's largely believed that by making such weapons more intelligent, autonomous, precise, and fast can make them more destabilizing. Specifically for hypersonic missiles, we would have potentially some destination ambiguity. For example, if an early warning system were to detect the launch of a hypersonic missile, the destination country would be unclear because AI systems could change the trajectory of a flight multiple times. For target ambiguity, it's for the very same reasons. Even if the destination country became clear, the target could be unclear for the same reasons. And so states may perceive these advances as a new threat to their missile defenses, their forces' survivability, or their retaliatory capabilities, leading to a further arms race and destabilization. The second idea that I have is that, or in terms of the regional impact, is that AI could fuel what I call a latent capability race. So AI could disrupt perceptions of threat, encouraging some countries to rush to develop civilian capabilities and creating a perception of vulnerability among others. So it comes this kind of cyclical or vicious cycle. Countries may seek to develop civilian capabilities with a view that they could be relevant, ancillary, or transferable to a military context in the future. This would create a dynamic similar to a nuclear fuel cycle race, for example, in which a state develops an indigenous nuclear fuel cycle with a view to the possibility that it could spur the development of a nuclear weapon program in the future. That's not to say that we have a fuel cycle race underway in the Middle East, but the example is just used for the sake of comparison. And in these cases, I think countries may overestimate the real extent of these capabilities or how they could be used. Factors compounding this problem is that you have blurred lines between the military and civilian applications of AI. As I mentioned, it's inherently dual use and private sector led, but also there's a difficulty in distinguishing between military and non-military AI spending. So what is the impact on proliferation? And that's a very difficult question to answer. And if I could, and if I had that answer, I would be a very rich man potentially. But there are two possibilities. One is that it increases WMD proliferation risks. It would be an increased incentive. This AI race would be an increased incentives to develop WMDs for would-be proliferators so that they could maintain some kind of parity with those who possess such capabilities. AI could definitely make some WMD development processes easier or cheaper. And AI could make existing WMDs more lethal or improve the means of delivery, their delivery. On the other hand, there's a chance of the decreased WMD proliferation risk. To begin with, it's already been argued that the increased range, reliability, accuracy, and lethality of conventional systems such as ballistic missiles, drones, and swarms, and the future availability of hypersonic missiles have already decreased the utility of WMD, and perhaps this would even further that trend. Technically, AI could also lead to decreased proliferation risks through better detection, verification, and implementation, and compliance. And several international organizations involved in monitoring proliferation activities have already, including the IAEA or the OPCW when it comes to verification, have claimed that they've already been exploring ways in which AI could support their missions. And in this case, AI could effectively kind of expand the toolbox of the non-proliferation community. And some are in the early stages of development and testing, but they haven't really been tested in a real world context. In terms of its possible impact on the zone, which is kind of the main focus of what we're studying at our program, on the urgency, will this increase or decrease the urgency? Ultimately, it boils down to the political impact of AI. It's largely believed that previous tech revolutions, such as the information communication revolution, the ICT revolution, or the revolution in the military affairs that it led to, didn't really have an impact on regional proliferation trends and the political will of Middle Eastern states in relation to the zone, and may have not even registered with them potentially. And so if that's any predictor of the future, it might not have an impact on the urgency. In terms of the timing and the means, whether AI should be discussed in a regional context and the forum in which those discussions should take place is really up to the states of the region. In my view, and at the risk of being prescriptive, it should be done through a separate and standalone process that, again, doesn't distract or bypass the WMD-Free Zone process. And this separate process could help inform the zone discussions in a way that enhances the ability of negotiators to understand and appreciate the impact of AI on WMD. As to the issue of when this should happen, it's probably still too early. And the timing really depends on the trajectory of AI and the developments regarding international understanding around it. As you would all agree, the world is still grappling with this internationally. So it's hard to imagine that the region will become a leader in addressing its impact. But we've already seen some enormous leadership from the region in multiple areas, and it wouldn't be so far-fetched to see something happening in a mini-lateral context, at least. In terms of the impact of the technical benefits of AI on arms control processes and the possible impact on the zone, I think there's still concerns about the vulnerabilities and transparency and understandability of AI systems that could undermine their role in arms control processes. For instance, an AI system or tool might suggest that a country is in non-compliance of a treaty, but this assessment could lack transparency and might not be readily understandable by policymakers. And this, again, is part of what the World Economic Forum calls, and others call the black box problem, which is essentially as follows. It's as the ability to train ever larger neural networks increases, it'll likely outpace the technical ability of humans to understand how they arrive at these outputs. And clearly navigating this will be a long-term process and will require sustained efforts in capacity building, development of norms and guidelines, and confidence building measures specific to using AI in arms control, non-proliferation and disarmament processes. Finally, in terms of recommendations, and admittedly, I don't have too many, but what I do have is two. One is a recommendation for countries to develop national strategies or policies for AI, especially insofar as its role in military applications. This could help states articulate their priorities, their goals, their objectives vis-a-vis AI. It could also help harmonize positions domestically within countries of the region, given that there are probably likely disparate views about how AI could be used. And it could be seen as a confidence building measure by other states in the region and could help to spur some kind of regional discussion. And secondly, capacity building, which I think we have to take not with a grain of salt, but within its proper context. The idea behind capacity building would be to prepare for a future when AI could be discussed by regional states, because at the end of the day, national capacities are required ahead of regional effort. And this could be a good starting point. And this is especially important given that there's such a big gap between public and private sector understandability when it comes to AI. So this could help bridge that gap. And ultimately, this could help inform the arms control community or arms control processes. I think that was my last slide. Yes, it was. I will stop there and hand the floor back to you, Chen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nasser, and thank you for taking a complex and really unknown area that is still under development. And I think it's interesting that as opposed to most technologies that we have in general globally that were tested before really launched to the world, AI is a technology that is still under development while it's being already used extensively. So this is something that I think all of us as observer of the technology and users, and obviously some have been developers as well. So this is fascinating, but really I think new territory to all of us and the world globally. And thank you for taking this complex topic and make it very, I think, clear and digestible paper and presentation. So with that, we will open the session to Q&A. If you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A section by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can also raise your hand function to take the floor. If you click on the bottom, a hand button, and you will be able to unmute your microphone and ask the questions as we will, by order that we will mention by name. So for that, let me start with a question to you, Nasser. So you mentioned that there are no statements from really the region or from regional states and officials about the topic of the intersection. What is the threat of AI and how it is intersect with a weapon of mass destruction proliferation or opportunities? Do you have an assessment why this is the case, and how do you think it's just because we are in the beginning to understand this aspect, or this is more because it's such a security and can be sensitive related aspect? So what is your assessment sort of for the silence? Because the region is not known for being silent on many things.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Chen, and I'm not sure I have an answer to that. It could be a capacity issue. It could be an issue that states are still sort of in the assessment mode or grappling or trying to internalize what they see from regional statements, regional use. But eventually, I think we'll reach a watershed moment where there will be some potential, incident or operation that heavily depends on AI or is heavily touted or described as an AI enabled attack that will maybe push things over the edge in terms of the regional silence.
Given the said that what will AI impact on global weapon of mass destruction proliferation will be still sort of something that we witness, and you eloquently mentioned some of the concerns that we will have, but also opportunity. But if it's too early to assess if it's a positive or negative assessment, which trends or indication should we look for? What do you think it will be a way to try to understand where does it take us, and where and one of the things that I think we grapple with is, will AI undermine the need for weapon of mass destruction because it will make a conventional weapon so fast, so precise, so accurate, that a weapon of mass destruction will be less of a need or attractive, or vice versa. If, for example, AI could improve so much weapon of mass destruction that it might, or create new ones, or help create new ones, so that something that actually will enhance proliferation, so of weapon of mass destruction. So where do you think we should look on trends sort of to try to figure out this question?
It's also a great question, Chen, and I think in our instance, what makes this particularly concerning is that we're in potentially one of the first times in history, we're in an area where we are in unknown unknowns. If you like to look at some theorists and strategists looking at risk and their ideas of risk, there are a lot of known unknowns, but there are very rarely unknown unknowns. And I think this is where we are now. And I think one of the shortcomings of our assessment of the trends, like you said, or how do we view this, is that we're trying to look at or shoehorning AI into existing or historical governance frameworks or risk assessment frameworks. And I don't think that's, I don't think this is a threat or a risk as a conventional problem amenable to kind of the 20th century models that we have. And governments, they are already behind the curve. And the concern is that we will have, we'll kind of wait too long before we mitigate these risks. The need is to mitigate these risks before they materialize rather than mitigate them after the fact.
So we have a question from Florentine van der Ermenband, and she's wondering what private companies that sell dual-use technology to the region directly or indirectly should do to mitigate risks.
It's also $1 million question. I'm not so much sure whether that's the role of companies or whether it's the role of governments where those companies are located. But companies do have a responsibility. While they lack sovereignty in the traditional sense, they wield real sovereign power and agency in the digital spaces that they've created and effectively govern. So what I would suggest is that companies and governments have discussions and dialogues about that very same question that you posed. I don't think that governments or companies can do it alone, and the solution lies in the cooperation between both.
Thank you, Nasser. And what do you think should be the best approach to regulate the creation, development, and implementation of AI technology and system in weapon of mass destruction?
Again, I think one part of it is that we have to have the great powers reach some kind of understanding about this before the rest of the globe can think about norms or can think about regulations, and against this backdrop of geostrategic competition over AI, or that has this technological expression, I don't see that happening. Once the great powers do, it will become more easy. But in terms of the best approach, and this might be a cop-out, but it's dialogue between the great powers is the departure point for this. Everything, all else will fall into place afterwards.
Thank you. We have a lot of interest, so I will continue to present some questions from our audience. So from Zinab Asawe from Djibouti, do you think AI could be used to help prevent the production of weapons of mass destruction?
That's a good question. I would say, Zainab, that what's been explored more commonly is the role of AI in enhancing the detection of proliferation. So there are several, as I mentioned, several instances where the IAEA or the OPCW have toyed with AI tools in terms of monitoring compliance to agreements and treaties, or the use of satellite imagery, the rapid analysis of satellite imagery to detect any anomalies when it comes to potential clandestine sites or things of that sort. But in terms of having AI barriers to the production of WMDs, I'm not sure there's anything specific to that.
Thank you. And from Alvemian, from One Goal Initiative for Governance, which criteria of evolution of AI tell us that it is time to start the process, as you mentioned in your presentation?
Yeah, I think, there's no specific criteria in the evolution of the technology that should push us towards this. It's just our appreciation of the risk. And like I said, one breakout model or one breakout incident will change everything very rapidly. And my view is that the ground has to be set in a way where we have these discussions before that happens. And I think going back to the earlier question made by one of the attendees is that what can be done at this moment, even from the role of the private sector, is that different communities, whether it's the private sector, or whether it's the arms control community, or whether it's a technical and scientific community, they can work in advance of the policy community to sort of conceptualize what regulations could look like. And in that way, when and if the time comes that the policy community is ready to have that discussion, the technical and scientific community have explored kind of what's plausible or what's potentially doable. I always liked the example and the case study of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, in which, decades before the treaty came into existence, and while the policy community was negotiating it, it was the technical community that was in discussion and testing and developing the technology of how the treaty could function and how the treaty could eventually come into force, so that when the diplomats agreed, there was already all that groundwork had been done.
Yeah, it's a very important example that I think we again and again mentioning that there is work that can be done even before a political readiness to negotiate directly or limit aspects. There are some technical aspects that can be tried to be resolved or at least addressed and discussed to inform those political discussions when they're ready to actually have them. So another question from Marta Bianakevich, and sorry if I'm butchering any names. Do you consider risk coming from the interaction of AI system, AI to AI, given that more autonomous systems are being deployed now in the warfare or high stakes context?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't look at that specifically. It's important to mention, Marta, that even though we're talking about AI and analyzing it, there's a lot of hype surrounding AI and what it can and can't do. But there has not yet been any change in military doctrines when it comes to AI. And this is important to note. Right now, there has been no sort of fully autonomous AI systems when it comes to some of of course, the WMD systems, but other conventional ones as well. So we've yet to see instances where there is one AI system fully, autonomous, let alone two interacting with each other. But conceptually, this is obviously a risk and an area of even greater concern because of the things that I mentioned earlier, but especially the mischaracterization and misattribution and of attacks or maneuvers, and the risk for escalatory action that would be taken by AI systems. And military operators are quite knowledgeable now and familiar with how their adversaries, for example, maneuver closely to their assets as a show of force or as a signal of hostile intent or as a warning signal. And the concern is that if you have AI systems making those decisions, they may misinterpret that and lead to this unnecessary escalatory action.
Thank you. And I think some point that you made in the paper that I found fascinating is that it's hard, and that's related to sort of the question this as well as before, and that you mentioned that some countries, because they want to sell AI or they want to sell industry-related weapons systems, they might actually hype their capabilities, and because of that, it's even harder to assess the capabilities themselves. And I thought that was really interesting aspect that I did not think about before.
It's becoming increasingly difficult to ascertain, how real this is, because there's this sales-driven component for states, but also states may make such claims because it enhances national security or creates a perception of vulnerability among adversaries, so it can quickly become into this kind of cyclical or vicious cycle, so to speak.
We have one more question that of a participant that wanted to ask myself for Farzan Sabad.
Thank you for a great presentation, a very timely and important initiative. So one comment and one question. For the comment, if you look at the discussions on lethal autonomous weapons in the Conference on Disarmament, there are regional states talking about this issue kind of in general. I haven't dug deeply enough into the sources to see to what extent they address WMD, but I imagine there's already some commentary happening, and I've seen some commentary happening there in case you haven't seen it. For the question, and apologies if I missed this at the beginning, but I'm curious on how you're defining AI. I ask this because there are certain countries in the region who will have security officials declare that a new system that they've developed is, quote, AI or includes machine learning or something. Strictly speaking, when it's examined what that technology does, it'll use algorithm or a certain level of automation, and they'll define that as AI. But it's from a perspective of the Western kind of industrial defense industry, it's not necessarily AI. And you see this in the hypersonic space, right? Where just because a ballistic missile has a hypersonic, kind of goes at hypersonic speeds on its reentry trajectory, they'll say, oh, this is a hypersonic weapons. But strictly speaking, it's not quite what we mean when discussing hypersonics in a strictly Western context. Thanks a lot. I appreciate the initiative.
Yeah, thanks, Farzan. Your question is definitely spot on. I think people are not distinguishing, between AI and what AI is and what autonomy is as well. And sometimes they're being used interchangeably, but there are two distinct concepts. Here, autonomy refers essentially to a system's ability to perform tasks with varying degrees of independence without direct human control. This means that a system can execute actions based on preset rules or conditions without requiring ongoing human input. But AI-enabled machines AI enables machines to achieve a more complex level of autonomy. Let's put it at that, by allowing them to respond dynamically to changing environments. So while AI can enhance an autonomous system by enabling it to make more sophisticated decisions, the system can be autonomous without using AI, operating solely on pre-programmed instructions. And yes, you're right, in the statements of both companies and states, these terms are often unclear or not distinguished. And I wonder if at times it is done, that's done purposefully so as to not clarify the real extent of the capabilities, because this also creates maybe a perception of vulnerability among adversaries.
Thank you. One more question from our audience, from Sarah Wood. She mentioned that you spoke about AI in the zone, as well as that one of your recommendations was for states to think internally on their own policies, etc., and start developing them and sort of consult within interagencies and departments that's relevant to the topic. But with diplomats now convened in New York for the zone conference and negotiation, what is the two or three points that you think are essential for them to understand or to think about in the AI context that might be relevant for their discussion?
For the zone specifically?
Yeah, I guess also threat perception and how it will influence both proliferation of weapon of mass destruction as well as where's the potential for.
That's a great question, Sarah, and I'm not sure I have an answer. In fact, when I was assessing the recommendations of the paper, I felt it was somewhat of a cop-out to say capacity building and development of national statements, because those seem to be just so obvious and such a given. At the risk of prescribing anything to diplomats who are definitely more well-placed than I am in terms of having these discussions, I think going back to their national authorities to at least encourage them to have this discussion and this dialogue internally among themselves about AI and how to develop a position on AI and how to respond to this growing and rapidly changing environment. That would be my modest and humble recommendation to them.
Thank you. I have one more question from Alve Mine. When you mentioned that we didn't see yet that AI influence countries to change their military doctrine, and sort of in order to project to the future, looking on the past, when did we see a military doctrine change in the past?
And that's a great question. And I think if you do look at national defense strategies as one expression of how military doctrines have evolved, if you look at WMDs, for example, they have been mentioned at around the time of their development or at the time of their use in these national defense strategies or in expressions of defense capabilities or defense goals or things of that sort. And it goes back to our earlier point with Marta, I believe, is that, or with you actually, which is, let's not wait until the doctrines change before we take action, and let's try to shape this rather than react to this. And I always like the analogy of, let's not think about ourselves as a thermometer by reflecting, the current state of affairs, but let's act like a thermostat and try to shape it. And I think that's the same approach I would take to this question.
Thank you. I think the last question that we have is, with the proliferation of weapon of mass destruction being a significant concern in the Middle East, how do you assess the risk associated with the intersection of AI and weapon of mass destruction that were not covered in the paper, given the fact that you said that things are developing really fast? And obviously, almost the reality we live today is almost not the reality that we lived 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. So is there any ideas of where things that you did not cover in the paper that you think worth thinking about or covering in the next paper or next research?
Yeah, I mean, I think with this pacing problem, what you're effectively saying is this pacing problem. We have a pacing problem with the technology, in that the technology is developing much faster than our ability to absorb its impact or even regulate or govern its consequences. And there is no real recommendation on how we get ahead of the curve. And my hope is that we find some kind of approach before it's too late, is effectively what I would answer to that.
Thank you. I have one more question from Sophia Potit from CNS. You mentioned that one unique aspect of the AI development race is the lack of export control compared to other dual-use technologies. While the US has placed increasing control on export of semiconductors and related technology, the trend of new AI system, to speak broadly, being able to be developed while requiring less compute capacity or fewer resources potentially complicates effort to control AI development through physical control on required hardware. Given this trend, do you see export control as a feasible route for managing AI development, or more of a temporary mitigating measure that will quickly be outpaced?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sophia. And the way I look at it would be to look at it as a lattice work of efforts to mitigate the risk. Export control being just one component, and like you said, maybe not an effective one or an increasingly not effective one, but I think it is one important tool amongst many, but it certainly shouldn't be the sole one. And I think when we do look at the transfer of technologies to third countries, yeah, there is some kind of moral, we're not talking about legality here, but there is some kind of moral responsibility amongst states who transfer this technology knowingly to other states.
One more question from Adelaide Robino. In terms of potential opportunities, do you think AI applications in the weapon of mass destruction technical field, for example, verification, could help in promotion of arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament in the long term? And could that help in building trust and reduce the threat perceptions in the region?
Yeah, as I say in the paper, Adelaide, and as I mentioned in my presentation, there are numerous things that are being worked on, like the automated analysis of satellite imagery, the using machine learning algorithms to verify compliance by comparing declared data with observed data for consistency and identifying any discrepancies, or modeling WMD proliferation networks. All these tools can help, but the idea is how much trust will people have in these tools, given that the trust in AI is not so high, and given that as AI advances further and further, the trust is likely going to decline because they will arrive at assessments that we might not be well positioned to understand.
And I think obviously not necessarily only AI, but when we speak about also quantum and the risk related to encryption and the fact that that will be jeopardized as well, that I think another layer of complication of and it's not only related to verification, it will be for everything that we are dealing with, how we make sure that really information that we have is safe and secure, and then the next level will be, do we trust it in the sense that it's not manipulated? On the other end, I think, and that's something that you mentioned as well, Nasser, is the fact that more and more actors in the region and globally actually have access to that technology, as opposed to some of the more other technologies, like, for example, nuclear weapons or chemical weapons. So there is some equalizer aspect in AI that can be a very attractive one.
Most certainly.
I will, with that, close our discussion. I will thank you, Nasser, for having really spearheading this topic within the region and expanding the middle of the Venn diagram for area for people to actually think about, and raising many questions. I think raising very important questions that we in the region and outside of it will and should continue to think about. So with that, thank you everyone that attended, and we are looking forward to have you in future events.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.